I'm 22, female, and live in London and have done so for 4 years. I was coming home from a gig one Wednesday night. It was probably around 11:30, and I had just made my switch to my final tube line of the night. It was fairly busy. I'd say around 10 or so people in the same carriage as me. I sit down in the flip-out seats nearest the door. As I'd just been to a gig, I'm a little tipsy, but definitely not drunk. I'm very cautious of my surroundings. As a couple of girls sat opposite me, then a smallish man. Everyone looks fairly normal. The man gets up and flips out the seat next to me and sits down. Now, to put me into some context, I'm a 5'8" competitive weightlifter, and this evening I was wearing all black with a leather jacket and heavy boots. I look like I'm in a lesbian biker gang. If someone was going to attack anyone, that would be a fair challenge. So when this little dude sits down next to me, I'm like, okay, bit weird that he moved from the comfortable seats to the crappy flip-out ones. I quickly glance over him. He doesn't look crazy. He doesn't smell of anything. He doesn't look high, and he's dressed fairly well. But he sits there completely angled towards me, like he's turned as far in my direction as he can. I can feel his gaze boring a hole into the side of my head. I have my headphones in, and I just look straight ahead. So then he starts twitching, like someone with Tourette's stifling a tick. So I'm genuinely put at ease for a little while. However, with the twitching, he starts biting his hand, and again I'm like, it's just a tick. But then he just sinks his teeth in, flesh, blood, and everything. He loosens his hold on his hand and then twitches and bites down again. Naturally, I'm like, I'm gonna get off this sealed underground container. So I get off at the next stop. The stop I actually need to get off at is the one a couple after this one. Walk off the platform as if I'm leaving, so he'd think I was leaving. Because I was on the Victoria line, I just assumed another tube would be along in the next couple of minutes. However, it wasn't, and I didn't want to miss the last train home, so I go to another way onto the platform and get back on the same train a few cars down. Now, when I got off the first car, the creepy guy looked at me super weirdly, kind of like longingly. I can't even place the kind of look it was really, it just freaked me out. So we get to the next stop and I see the guy walking down the platform. Now at 11:40 p.m. on a Wednesday night when you're all alone, you barrel down the platform to the exit as quickly as you can. Nobody really wants to hang about down there. So when I see the creepy guy just ambling down the platform at the next stop, it tells me something is off. He's walking, looking around, looking dejected. Then he clocks me. It becomes painfully apparent to me that I'd moved down the train to get away from him. Luckily, the doors had just closed. He makes eye contact with me and starts shrieking and banging on the closed doors, blood from his bitten hand smearing everywhere as the train pulls away. That sight has rattled me and has continued to do so months afterwards. This takes place 4 years ago in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm originally from California, so trading up city life for a less urban life was very challenging for me. Making friends was hard, but I made the move to be with my dad, who lived in an apartment complex with a roommate. My dad was a trucker, so he was gone for weeks at a time, while I was left alone to work and come home to a foreign place that I was slowly becoming accustomed to. My roommate was gone most of the time because he had a girlfriend, and he would leave his dog with me, so I never really felt truly alone. I had an old lady for a neighbor that would come up and check on me too. That's how people were in that area, and I found it kind of nice how people knew their neighbors. I got to know everyone in my building's name after about 6 months of living there, except one. There was a man, I'd say in his early to mid-50s, who lived directly below my apartment. He looked, for lack of a better description, like a creep. He was balding except for on the sides of his head, which that hair was straggly too. He was tall and kind of skinny, and had outdated 90s glasses that you'd see on America's Most Wanted, and a thick mustache. He was the only person in the building who wasn't friendly, or at least didn't make an effort to say hello or introduce himself to me. He also happened to be the maintenance man for all 5 buildings. I didn't think much of this at first. I honestly didn't care if you're not overtly friendly to me. I enjoy having space of my own, and sometimes being too friendly is suspicious to me. That's just a personal problem, but I'm explaining why I didn't send up any red flags at first. One day when I was pulling out of the driveway to go to work in the morning, I noticed across the large lawn that led to the door to our buildings, the maintenance man was standing in the center, staring directly at me. Stare is the wrong word, more like a glare. At first, I looked around confused, thinking perhaps he was looking at someone or something behind me. I was the only one there. Although a bit creeped out, I shrugged it off and continued with my day, forgetting all about it. The next day I was over at my neighbor Claire's apartment, the older lady, and she happened to bring up a maintenance issue she had, but mentioned she would never ask the maintenance man for anything, and neither should I. I tried to ask her more about what she meant by that, but she ended up being very broad and said something along the lines of, "He's just a known creep around here." Fast forward to the first incident. It was around 2 a.m. and I was still awake, but only barely, sitting on the couch watching Parks and Rec alone in the apartment. I was starting to drift off into sleep when I heard a soft noise near the front door. Thankfully, the show was very low in volume because normally I don't pick up on quiet noises most of the time. I turned off the TV and began listening. Next to the living room on the right side is the patio area, and on the left is the kitchen and the front door. The light from the moon and outside lamps were flooding through the patio glass door, so I could see the doorknob to the front door moving. Not just moving, but someone was using a key. In an instant, the door flung open and I was on my feet, with nowhere to hide at that point. I stood my ground and saw the silhouette step into the kitchen. That's when I saw it was the maintenance man. My stomach dropped and he stopped dead in his tracks when he spotted me, looking as if it was unexpected to find me awake. I noticed he had a large coat on, even though it wasn't winter or even cold that particular night. I noticed that only because the jacket looked bulky, as if he were carrying things in it that I couldn't see. "What are you doing?" was all I managed to squeak out. I was shaking, my knees feeling like they were going to give out. For reference, I was a 22-year-old woman standing a whopping 5'4" with no way to defend myself at all from where I was standing. He looked shocked, which made me feel like I had gained a little power from the situation. He retorted confusedly and angrily with, Your toilet is making a loud noise that I could hear from my bedroom." I was angry and terrified, and only reacted with more anger when I saw him scrambling for excuses. "So you just let yourself into my apartment at 2 in the morning? I'm reporting this to management first thing in the morning." He stepped closer to me then. I backed up a few steps but still stood my ground, quickly turning on the light closet to me so he could see my fury. "The toilet is rumbling. I need to check it. Now." No, I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. I had adrenaline and anger and fear all coursing heavily through my body. "Get out." He started to take the liberty to look around the kitchen where he was standing. My head immediately thought, crap, what if he goes for a knife? And that's when he said it. "I can come in whenever I want." The sentence makes me shiver to this day. I didn't know what to do and felt the power over the situation quickly dwindling down to a bad feeling that something bad was about to happen. "If you don't get out of my apartment right now, I'm going to start screaming as loud as I can." My voice was cracking and shaking, which made my heart drop into my stomach. I immediately felt like I was going to be sick when he took another step forward towards me. "Check the lease. I can come in whenever I want. I'll see you later." He winked at me, creating a wave of nausea, and I felt faint. He slowly turned around and walked out, closing the door behind him and even going far enough as to lock it from the outside with his extra key. The next day, I contacted management as soon as their office opened. I could tell the conversation wasn't going anywhere when the manager sounded irritated right off the bat. When I told her that guy entered my apartment illegally, she cut me off and told me they do not allow any illegal activity and take what I was saying very seriously. I thought, yes, I've got him. Until the manager said, "You can't just throw around accusations without proof. This man has been dedicated over 20 years to working for this company, and we don't plan on getting rid of him anytime soon. Perhaps if you had read over your lease like you should have," yes, she was actually scolding me, "you would have seen the clause that states that a maintenance worker has keys to the entire property, and if there is a maintenance issue, they are permitted to access the property at any time of the day." This floored me. It couldn't possibly be illegal. Of course, I'm from California, and of course I didn't read the lease carefully. When I moved there, my dad was already living in the apartment, and I literally had nowhere else to go. So if I were to be living there, I was going to have to sign the lease no matter what, so I did. Needless to say, nothing got done. Fast forward again, a few days go by and I don't see Mr. Maintenance Freak. Until I do. This time I'm pulling in after a long 10-hour shift at work. I haven't forgotten about the scary incident, but I had to put it at the back of my mind for the time being to concentrate on other things, although I did lose sleep over it. I park my car facing the large lawn area again and start using my phone for a few minutes. I'm peering down at my phone and glance up for a split second before I see him there. He's standing across the lawn, staring angrily again at me. I mean furious. I quickly look back down and pretend to not have seen him, getting that sinking feeling again. As a paranoid person, I put the key in the ignition just in case and pretend to keep scrolling on my phone while suddenly locking my door. I glance up again, and this time he's stalking toward me very fast. I look in my rearview mirror, hoping to see someone else that he may be stomping angrily towards, and of course no one is there. I nearly dark out, but when he gets about 10 to 15 feet away from the front of my car, I can hear him shouting something, but I can't make out what he's saying. Now I put my phone down and I'm watching him come right at me until he reaches my window and starts banging on it with all his might and slams his body into my door. He's also fidgeting angrily with the handle even though the doors are locked. My car doesn't have automatic locks, so I'm praying to God that all my doors are locked at this point. My hands are shaking so bad that I'm having trouble starting the car. When I finally do, I realize what he's saying, which was a repeated cycle of the following phrases. "I'm going to get you. I told you I can come in whenever I want. You really want to take me on? I'll kill you." I peeled out of there so fast, not even knowing where I was going. I drove to the next county over, found a motel, and stayed the night there. The next day, I took work off and went straight to the management's office. I told them exactly what happened, and no matter what I said, they didn't believe me. This maintenance man was apparently God's gift to mankind or something. He was a monument to the company, and they appreciated his 20 years of service and dedication to them over him risking someone's life with threats. Long story short, I lost it. I called her psychotic and ended up getting evicted. I reported all of this to the police, but between the lack of evidence I had and his perfect record and shining references from his employees that seemed to love him, the police said there was nothing they could do to move forward at this point. My dad and I ended up finding a nice home about 10 minutes away from that place. I ended up inviting Claire, my older neighbor, to the house a few months later. She told me there was a single woman in the apartment before the roommate and my dad had moved in there, that had also left in a hurry after something happened with a maintenance man taking photos of her walking to and from the apartment to her car. When she confronted him about it, he told her, "I can do whatever I want." I guess in Kansas City, maintenance workers are like God. They get away with whatever they want and have shining reputations. Needless to say, it's been 4 years and I'm back in California. Before I begin, I'm going to say that I'm a 19-year-old man working a full-time job. I have since moved out of the place that this incident occurred in. What happened took place when I was about 6 years old. I lived in a decent neighborhood. We did have the occasional creepy person that would walk by or bike by. We also had some apartment buildings where the people living there were heavy into drugs but didn't bother anyone. They were nice people to talk to and frequently mentioned they were into that stuff. They never bothered me, so I didn't care. Now enough with the background. The house I lived in at that point was a very decent size. My dad also built a garage, a huge garage. Now, this is where what happened. The garage was huge. It had enough space for 3 vehicles and rafters on the ceiling for storage of seasonal stuff, Halloween and Christmas. This took place in December. I live in Atlantic Canada, and in Atlantic Canada, we get some pretty nasty snowstorms and blizzards. On a day in December, I was being a little kid in the snow and my dad was working the garage on one of his car projects. He had gotten thirsty and went into the house to get a drink. He came back out and asked if I had gone into the garage. I asked why, and he said there's footprints in the snow leading to the garage that he didn't think were his. I said no. We both thought nothing of it. That evening, my dad and I went to bed early. My mom works late and came home late that night and saw one of my toys that were in the rafters stored away were on the garage floor. She thought nothing of it, moved them and parked the vehicle in the garage, closed the garage door, went into the house, and watched some TV and went to bed. Now, my dad wakes up at 4 a.m. every morning to be at work at 5 a.m. The garage door was open when my dad woke up, so naturally he was angry. He wakes everyone up and goes out to the garage, comes back in and is freaking out about a lot of very expensive equipment was missing. We called the cops. The outside lights were flicked on and we saw those same mysterious footprints leading to the garage earlier, leading into the backyard and into the forestry behind my house. The cops searched the garage. My mom brought up the toys falling from the rafters. The cops asked to borrow a ladder and went up to check. They found a gun, a meat cleaver, and 3 condoms, 2 of which were used. I didn't sleep for a week. I was terrified. They caught the guy 2 weeks later trying to sell all of my dad's equipment at a pawn shop. He confessed everything. He said he broke into other houses on our street. He also stated he watched our house for a whole month to learn all of our routines so he wouldn't get caught. He had the weapons in case he did. He said he used the condoms whenever he would stalk my mom. He is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence. I don't want to know what would have happened if my mom, dad, or I had saw him. In my neighborhood, we had a few burglaries. I work from home and am usually home alone with my son. We live near a busy mall, and our neighborhood, even though in a pretty good area, is close to highways and has 3 ungated entrances, so it makes it easy for people to break in, steal, and get out before police come. I scare pretty easily, so hearing an alarm going off nearby, seeing the police helicopter circle above, and having the neighborhood swarming with cop cars always freaks me out. We had a spree of guys going into unlocked cars and stealing stuff. I mention this because there were 25 cars they were able to get into. Our area is the kind where you can leave your door open and usually nothing happens. At this point, it's been petty theft. Nothing major has been stolen and no one has been hurt. So for the next few months, everyone is angry. We all feel really violated by what has been happening. Homeowner meetings are packed and everyone wants to put a stop to crime going on in our neighborhood. It is soon revealed a rental property in the hood was the home to a drug dealer who was dealing more than just marijuana. He was selling hardcore stuff, and it was thought that a lot of the crime stemmed from that house. They had undercover cop cars throughout the neighborhood waiting to make a bust. Up until this point, it was pretty scary, but from a faraway viewpoint. Also, at this point no one was getting hurt, at least not physically. Our neighborhood watch sent out information to make sure alarms are on, windows and doors are locked, and if a car is in the driveway, more than likely burglars will skip your home. Just lock your car doors. Since I work from home, my car is always in the driveway. One afternoon in April, my son and I were on a walk. It was a nice day, and about 2 blocks from our house, the cop cars came rushing in. I was told to get back to my house as soon as possible. An officer actually escorts us to our door and let me know to lock all my doors. There are 3 armed assailants on the run between my street and the next. They broke into 2 houses. In one, a woman was home alone and the 3 men did terrible things to her, tied her up and left her. They broke into a second home and they pistol whipped a man that was home. The next week, a woman was nearly kidnapped on a 6 a.m. run on my street. The fear was real at this point. Going out alone during the day or night wasn't happening. None of these criminals were caught. But then things died down. Usually every couple of days there was a break-in. There was nothing after this in early April. In late May, I had to take my car into the dealership for some work. I was left without a car for 2 days. To keep my son busy, we would go on long walks to the mall with 2 other moms and kids in the morning and then go swimming in our pool in the afternoon. A lot of the stay-at-homes grouped together because of fear of the recent things going on. This day, it was actually pretty nice out, so I had all of our sliding glass doors open and I was letting the house air out. While I was bathing my son, I got a funny feeling, so I rushed and locked all the doors and blinds as quickly as possible. Even though it is in our backyard, I didn't feel safe leaving them open, with me down the hall in a bathroom. Just as I was walking away from the last door, I see 2 large men entering my backyard on our security camera in the kitchen. We have 3 stations in our house where you see the feed from the cameras inside and outside. We have one in our bedroom, one in the office, and one in the kitchen. My husband does security systems, so he set us up with the most elaborate and expensive unit. We have 2 padlocks on the gate, so I was pretty freaked out they were able to get in. These men are big guys, at least 6 feet and around 220 pounds, give or take. I'm 5'3" and 140 pounds. I am not a tiny girl, but I would be no match for these guys. The guys are trying to look through the windows, so I edge back into the bathroom and realize that I have left my cell phone outside by the pool, so I cannot call anyone or get any attention from outside of my house. All I have is my work phone in the office that needs to be booted up to be used. I was on vacation for the week, so the system was shut down for the entire time. I grab my son, his diaper bag, and we make our way into my office. The room is pretty soundproof. You have to be screaming for it to be heard outside. It has access to the security cameras and where you can actually hear audio from the cameras, and it has a heavy-duty lock on the door. My husband set it up so that it would be a panic room if we ever needed it. It is hidden in our garage, and unless you turn on all the lights in the garage, you have to walk around his tool bench and a high shelf. If you're not looking, you may not even realize there is another room there. My son thankfully falls asleep on the rug in the room. I am freaking out watching these guys as they use a little hammer to break the sliding glass door to enter my bedroom. I am getting the computer started to call the police. Once they are inside, I am only able to see them in the living room, kitchen, and my son's room. They are all going into all 5 bedrooms of my house, rummaging through closets and drawers. The larger of the 2 men walk into the living room. He has a cell phone in his hand, and he literally looks at the camera in the living room and waves with his phone in his hand. He then opens his bag, pulls out a knife, rope, and duct tape, and what I later found out were condoms. He then says, "Hey, pretty mama, where are you hiding? We want to have some fun with you." I realize these guys aren't here to steal stuff. I finally am able to call the cops. They tell me to stay secured in the room, turn out the lights, stay on the line, and be as quiet as possible. These guys are tearing my house apart, and they are calling my name looking for me. They even start calling my son's name. This part freaks me out. How did they know our names? One of them actually started eating the chicken I baked for dinner. They are rummaging through my laundry room, and one of them grabs a pair of dirty underwear and inhales deeply. It is the most disgusting thing I have ever witnessed, and I was praying they didn't find us. They make their way into the garage, and they are looking around. I can only see a little from the kitchen camera. I am praying they don't turn on the lights to see the entrances to the office in the corner of the garage. I am whispering into the phone, keeping the dispatcher up to date on what I am seeing on her security feed. She tells me the cops are 4 minutes out. They are rummaging through the garage. I hear them playing with my husband's power tools. My son wakes up and surprisingly doesn't start crying. He actually looks at me, sucking his thumb. I know what these guys have in mind for me, but I'm so scared to think of what they're going to do to my son. That single thought brings me to tears even as I recount the situation I tell. I bring my son into the closet of the room with a flashlight, bottle, and blanket, and I mouth for him to be quiet and shut the door. The dispatcher tells me the cops are 3 minutes out. Her name is Janice. I beg her to tell them to hurry up. She tells me to keep calm and that she is there with me. She recommends that I get in the closet as well. I don't, because I don't want them to think about my son if they break through the door. Then the guys start pounding on the office door. These guys are pulling at the door, and it sounds like they are throwing their weight into the door. I hear my husband's power saw. At this point, the bigger guy screams, "I know you and the baby are in there. We're here to do what we want. You should have just come out when we came in." I'm literally shaking and praying the door and lock holds up. I move a dresser in front of the door. No idea why I did that, but it's what they do in the movies. I then push the futon in the room against the dresser, just praying the weight on the door would keep them out. I tell the dispatcher what is going on, and she tells me the cops are breaking through the front window. I look at the security system, and sure enough, there looks to be 4 or 5 cops at my door. The rest was a blur, and it felt like it was forever with all the noises of taking the guys down, and then just silence. I was sobbing and rocking in the dark with my son in my arms, who still sat there quietly hugging me and patting my back. Soon I heard a knock on the door. It was a female officer. It took me a moment to open the door, and I didn't even realize I still had Janice on the phone. The guys were arrested. They were caught with a large amount of cocaine, meth, and roofies on them. They had broken into the drug dealer's house before they broke into my house. The cops later disclosed that they had been stalking and watching me for weeks. They knew I was home all along, and I was the next victim on their list. I thank God they didn't get to me because I have no idea if I would still be here to tell this story. We actually were able to sell our house 2 months ago and were able to move out of state. Our new home has a gated entrance. My house has security cameras in every room, and I have a gate around the entire property. To the burglars terrorizing my old neighborhood, I hope you get what you deserve. It's a Tuesday night at Office Depot where I worked. Just happened a few hours ago. A customer comes in needing to fax some things at 7 p.m. He said he remembered me from the last time he was there to fax, and I said, "Probably. I don't remember you, but I'm bad with remembering faces." Whatever. Skip to about 5 to 10 minutes later when his confirmation page finally comes in. I'm ringing him up, and without any context, he asks me, "Do you know how to get rid of a dead body?" I replied nervously, "No. Well, I do watch a lot of TV, so..." He interrupts with, "This is how you get rid of a dead body. You deep freeze the body, you get a wood chipper, you back that sucker up into a river or lake and chip away the body, and then the little fishies eat the body away. Then you take your wood chipper to a car wash and wash it out." While saying this, he's not laughing or cracking a smile. He just tells me this very calmly and with a practical tone, as if he's giving me instructions on how to change a light bulb. It may not seem like a big deal. I'm totally into true crime and reading up on serial killers, but this was not reading an article. This was a man with a blank stare, giving me instructions on how to effectively get rid of a dead body with no context whatsoever. To preface, I'm a 5'6" male at a stocky 160 pounds, though most see me at about 30 pounds lighter, which works to my advantage more often than not. I'm one of the last people a person would ask to help move something heavy, for example. I've also experienced more than my fair share of violence in my life, which is why I respond the way I do. The other party is my girlfriend's pit bull Bubba, a beautiful, good-natured service dog. I had to emphasize the last due to their reputation. He is a seizure assist dog and a giant teddy bear at 87 pounds. I have seen him let a 5-year-old ride him like a horse, and short of cats, he tried to make more dogs friends at every meeting possible. He is more likely to lick you to death than anything. He is more like an 87-pound lapdog than anything. He's a good boy. This occurs about 3 weeks ago. I'm watching TV on a brisk Sunday morning as fall is settling in. As I'm watching some CSI variant, Bubba goes and rings the bell at the front door, whines and lets out a raunchy fart, letting me know that he's about to relieve himself. It being a balmy 38 degrees Fahrenheit outside, I reluctantly grab my jacket and a cigarette to keep myself occupied, leash him, then enter the breach, so to speak. As we walk out the door, I spark up a smoke, but letting him know that the timer has started and let him lead me, within reason, to where he's going to drop his deuce. We get to a small field not far from our place that he likes to go and start searching. This place had a house on it at one point, I am sure, but that has long since been demolished. What remains is an empty lot and weeds about waist to chest high thanks to good summer rains and a perfect place for him to fertilize the earth. I would rather keep the peace with our neighbors and keep him from crapping on their front lawn, even though I carry the bags to pick it up. As we are carousing through this empty lot, I notice a group of 4 individuals walking down the street, the lead one holding a bat. I don't live on a good side of town, literally on the wrong side of the tracks. Either case, they are just walking down the street and the lead guy has a bat. Alarm bells start ringing since he is holding the bat in an aggressive manner. I could be wrong, so I maintain business as usual. As Bubba gives me the signal that he is getting ready to drop a deuce by scratching at the ground, I hear the lead guy with the bat say off in the distance, "I've got something for this idiot." Great. My mind kicks into overdrive. I have a small knife about 3 inches tucked in my right pocket. I relocate that to the cuff of my right sleeve. I pull out my phone and dial 911, looking as inconspicuous as possible to work through my options. I can exit stage right through the nearby alley. However, I am 40 and just can't run like I did when I was 20. If they catch up to me in the alley, there aren't many witnesses to whatever they want to do with me. I could run down the street, but I'm not even sure if someone would as much call 911, let alone help me. I decided that making a stand was my best bet. I was going to cut the dog loose since he was going to run anyways. He doesn't like conflict, and take out the guy with the bat first with my little work knife after making a quick call to 911 for police assistance and dropping my phone in the dirt since I was on my Bluetooth at the time. Since he was the head, I'm fairly certain that his friends would scatter, but not entirely sure. It's still better than dealing with 3 friends and 1 guy with a bat. And before you knock it, he has to swing with that bat. If I can dodge the first swing and close in with a knife, I am in a much better position than him to do some damage. Why am I planning this, you might ask? Well, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. I'm not knocking our boys in blue. They do as good a job as they can, and I support them. But in this case, it's up to me to hold my own until they come. That, and I'm wanting to be absolutely sure of their intentions before I start calling the cops or pulling a knife on someone. This is real life, not Hollywood. No telling what these idiots were on, since meth and crack are a thing out here as well. So there I sit, Bubba starting to crap as they are clearly approaching. I slip the knife in my hand, get ready to slip the leash wrapped around me off while simultaneously getting ready to hit the send button on my phone and drop it. It takes everything I can muster to hold Bubba back on a good day, let alone when he is trying to run away from a problem. As soon as the guy with the bat hits the sidewalk, the point where I was going to call the police, he sees Bubba. Oh crap, I ain't going to next him, that dog bites. At that point, I breathe a sigh of relief. One of them comes up to me while Bubba is dropping a deuce and asks me, "Does he bite?" "Yeah, he does," was my response, and the 4 of them keep going the original direction they were going. After I got home, Bubba got some extra treats and cuddles, even though he doesn't even know his part in this. Had I been one guy out there alone, I have no doubt what my fate would have been. Thanks be to one big teddy bear that didn't happen. My educational and professional backgrounds are firmly rooted in government and public policy. My chosen field is generally thought of as useless, low-paying, and without many opportunities to actually practice or advance. So, you can imagine how happy I was when I got an offer to be a legislative director for a very high-profile state legislator. Things were pretty interesting at first. We lost our chief of staff to a better-paying job in the private sector about 2 months in, so I took over the day-to-day operations of managing the office, managing my boss, and dealing with every entitled constituent, pushy lobbyist, and haughty elected official under the sun. Even though my job was getting harder by the nanosecond, I was happy to be doing it. I am a wonk at heart, and I was in wonk heaven at that office. That is, until the crazy people started calling, writing, and worse, visiting the office. If you've never worked in an elected official's office, let me give you a little rundown. Most people who reach out are normal, albeit sometimes angry, frustrated, scared, or all of the above. That's okay. Those are the people you want to hear from, and if you can, try to make happy. Conversely, there is a subset that will also make contact, and they will make you regret your decision to put off law, business, grad school for another year. It seems that every untreated, depressed, bipolar, psychopathic, and schizophrenic adult within a 50-mile radius will reach out to you about some crazy stuff. They've seen your boss on television, mentioned in the newspaper, or attended a town hall meeting, and decided to push the limits of legislative responsibility and accountability as far as they will stretch. I had to reach out to the state troopers stationed in the Capitol for protection on multiple occasions. The legislative session wasn't too far away, and its approach was inspiring them to reach out. I first encountered these people when I was interning in D.C. I was working in the personal office of a committee chairman whose name everyone would recognize if I mentioned it, and because of his visibility, everyone and their dog's dog would call. It was the fall of 2008. The economy had gone to crap, Obama was about to win the election, and I had mother effers calling me about the government using the emissions from microwaves to read the mind of every single American, and saying that they represented multi-trillionaires who had every dime the government needed to get the country's finances back on track. That was the type of crap that I expected to encounter when I first started this job, so naturally, I encountered something else. I went into the office super early one morning to get a jump start on my day. My boss had yelled at me for an hour the night before over something that wasn't my fault, and I was in a particularly bad mood because of it. I figured diving into my work early would help keep my attitude in check. As I sorted the mail and halfway listened to Robin Meade bantering away on the giant flat screen we had in the office, I realized that I wasn't alone. A blonde, middle-aged woman was hovering over at my desk, silently staring at me. Normally, the intern sat in the outer office and managed the flow of visitors, but as I was there before the Capitol was officially open, it was just me and the four walls. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I don't know how long she had been standing there, but she had clearly been waiting for me to notice her. When I asked how I could help her, her expression grew rather dark and agitated, as though someone had flipped a switch. She raised one arm and started tugging at her ratty hair and humming, but didn't respond to me. I felt every fiber in my body inwardly groan in exasperation as I realized that this woman wasn't all there. I had recently had a crazy visitor who lived in the district, barely spoke English, and didn't understand anything about national or state government, pull some next-level crazy the week before. So between that and how irritated I already was, I was not in the mood for more nonsense. I cleared my throat, put on my best, I'm only pretending to be nice to you so you'll vote for my boss in November grin, and asked again how I could help her. It was then that I realized that I had left the front door unlocked, and was now paying the price. I also noticed that the woman had a child's backpack with her. It was pink, had some girly things printed on it, and it was stuffed beyond its natural capacity. I kept one eye on my visitor and the other on the hand holding this fuller-than-full backpack. I was sitting there looking at her eye cockeyed when she finally stopped humming and spoke. "Yeah, my mom is up in the legal department. Can I sit here and wait for her?" I blinked and told her that I misheard her. She tried again. "My mom has an appointment up in the legal department on the second floor. Can I wait here for her in your office?" This is when the alarms started going off in my head. First, the state legislature doesn't have a legal department. There's a legal division that houses the general counsel and his team, but they're set up in a building 3 blocks away, not on the second floor of the Capitol. There's nothing but legislative offices and support offices on that floor. There's also the chief of staff. I'd been cruising in the office directly below mine. I knew every inch of the second floor, so that was strike one. Secondly, the legal department wasn't open. It wasn't even 8 a.m. yet, and given that we weren't in session, few staffers were at work before 9:30. The legal division supported us for the most part and kept a similar schedule. Third, the legal department doesn't take appointments with random individuals, or really anyone for that matter. When they weren't doing legislative research, reconciling bill drafts with current state law, or defending the legislator against lawsuits and other legal actions, they weren't doing much of anything besides talking to their friends on the legislative side. I knew that this woman was a bit off and lying, and I told her that there wasn't any legal department. She started pulling her hair again and hummed even louder, and so help me, I've never been so frightened by humming in my life. There was something menacing about it, especially with the way she glared at me and yanked at her scalp. Some of her ratty, thinning hair was already falling onto my desk. It slowly dawned on me that this woman wasn't just off her rocker. She was potentially dangerous, and I'd upset her by exposing her explanation for being in the building as a lie. I suddenly remembered that we had a panic button that summoned the state troopers somewhere in the office. I tried to think of where it was and how I could get to it as I asked her again how I could help her. Every hair on my neck was standing straight up. She repeated her story about waiting for her mother, but now wanted to use the phone to call her. Specifically, she wanted to use my phone, which was on my desk as usual. "I'm not in charge, ma'am," I lied. Someone chose that moment to send me a text, and my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. I just ignored it and kept smiling at her. I put in an even more pretend helpful tone and suggested that she speak to the troopers at one of the entrances. It didn't work on her. She stopped humming but kept glaring at me as she broke into song. I can't remember all of the words, but her song was along the lines of wicked people being punished and included my first name, which was on my nameplate. I know better than to show fear in these situations, so I pretended not to notice her demented song and simply said, "I'm sure the state troopers can help you find your mother. Our office isn't open yet, so you can't stay here." I got up and offered to walk her down to where the troopers were. For some reason, this worked on her. She was still unhappy and very crazy, but she slowly backed out of my office. I followed her out to make sure she left. She walked backwards all the way to the front door, glaring and pointing at me until she was standing in the hallway. I locked the door immediately and called the troopers to my office. If you think she just left, you're wrong. Our door was partly made of frosted glass with a design in it that has exposed regular glass. She stood there staring at me through the frosted part and hummed until 2 troopers showed up to escort her out of the building. I found out later that the woman had pulled the same crap at the governor's office and 4 other legislative offices. She sometimes had luggage with her instead of the little girl's backpack she brought with her to my office. She actually bit an intern on the face, which had gotten her banned from the building, but she still showed up super early to avoid being detected. When I was young, my family moved us from a third world country in Asia to a western, safe country. During that time, foreigners weren't that widespread here, so in fear of being discriminated against, my parents weren't fond of asking for help, even from the police. This is important later. My family was not well off, and to keep afloat, my parents had to work long hours, often leaving me home alone for a few hours after school. I had been walking home from school with my neighbor, Dan, who was my age, when I noticed he kept looking behind us with a troubled expression on his face, as if though something was wrong. Every time I turned around, though, I saw no one. Whenever I asked him what was up, he just dismissed it and said nothing. Thinking back on it now, I think he didn't want to scare me. I brushed it off as Dan playing a prank on me, and we went home even though my gut was telling me something wasn't right. After about 20 minutes of being at home, I suddenly hear a loud knock on the door. This is very unusual, as no one usually visited, so to me, this was already a red flag. I crept to a window that had a view of the porch and discreetly lifted the corner of the curtain to see who it was without being detected. I saw a tall man, around mid to late 20s, short hair, and he was wearing a long black coat with black pants. What scared me was his demeanor. He looked very tense, almost angry, and was glaring at the door very hard. I barely saw him blink. All the while, he was constantly knocking. I watched him for a couple of minutes until it seemed like he was leaving. I immediately called my parents, and they told me to never answer the door, and that it was probably a door-to-door salesperson or something. I thought that maybe they were right until the knocking soon began again. Only this time, he was pounding the door, almost as if though he wanted to break it. I was terrified. He kept pounding, and after a solid 10 minutes he shouted, "I know you're in there, little girl." I nearly lost it. I frantically kept calling my parents, telling them what I heard, and I think this man was going to hurt me. My parents, not wanting to get in trouble for leaving a 9-year-old home alone, the legal age here is 14, didn't want to call the police and kept telling me if I just hunkered down into the room furthest in the house and waited, he would go away. Now, to be fair, my parents aren't horrible or uncaring. The house is built solidly, and there was no way of entering or exiting except for the heavy front door where the man was. Even the windows aren't easily accessible, but all this meant to me was that I was trapped. I remember crying so hard and being terrified for my life, but trying to be silent just in the off chance the man could hear me. By this point, the man kept altering between pounding the door and staying very still and silent. I knew because I kept creeping back to the window, hoping the silence meant he went away, but he was always there, giving that same intense, hateful stare as if he wanted me to feel it through the door. It felt like he had been standing there for hours, but in reality, this whole ordeal lasted only about 20 minutes. Thankfully, after that 20 minutes, I heard nothing and couldn't see him either. Not long after that, my mom came home early to check up on me. She checked around the whole house, the surrounding area, and even asked the neighbors, but the man left no trace and no one else had seen him. The only sign he was there was a couple of scratches on the door. When Dan was questioned by adults, He just said that he noticed a man following us from near the school area, but the man kept his distance, so he couldn't get a good look at him. He also wasn't sure whether it was just someone who happened to be walking the same way as us, so he didn't want to say anything. We never found out what the man wanted with me. After that, I wasn't allowed to be home alone for a long time. Instead of going home, I'd go to Dan's house after school until one of my parents picked me up. As far as I know, I never saw the man again. Honestly, I wish they called the police because after that day, I became permanently paranoid about strangers. This incident occurred about 2 years ago. One night after a long shift around 10 p.m., I hopped on the bus to meet up with a friend to hang out before going home. The bus arrived and I sat on the first available seat. About 5 minutes in, a man sitting in front of me began making comments like, "What's a girl like you doing out at this time?" I looked up to see a bald man in his late 20s or early 30s with a huge scar on his cheek, dressed in all black, wearing a black hat, black leather jacket, and black boots. Something about him gave me the creeps, so I told him I was meeting my boyfriend. He offered to take me out for drinks, but I proceeded to say that I had plans and was not interested, and reminded him that my boyfriend was waiting for me. He placed his hand on my lap and began telling me his address, trying to convince me to come hang out with his friends at his place and come over. Despite my plans, something about this guy gave an unsettling feeling in my gut, so in order to avoid any conflict, I walked up to the bus driver and asked how long before we arrive at the destination. Instead of going back to the same spot, I sat closer to the back doors, which was far away from the creepy guy. The man got up and I sat where I was sitting before and did not move or say a word for 10 minutes. He then stood up and began walking in my direction. He sat there in the seats beside me, placed his hand on my lap again, looked at me and asked, "What was that all about up there?" I said I had no idea what he was talking about. He slammed the seats with his hands as hard as possible and yelled, "You know what you did." At that point, everyone turned back to watch as he began threatening and swearing. One woman helped me to get to the front to let the driver know that this guy is touching me and harassing me. A woman told me to stand in front of her as the driver said we'd be at the terminal soon where he'd notify security. Still hearing him scream in the back, smashing the seats, I saw him get up, so I had to think of a safety plan. Near a stop coming up, there were security guards at a restaurant called the Beer Market. My plan was to wait until the bus comes to a full stop, make sure he's not getting off, then last minute run off the bus towards the security guards and ask them to call the police. Well, everything went according to plan, except the moment I got off the bus, the man quickly jumped off. Panicking, I ran back on the bus before the doors closed. Once the doors were closed, everyone said the man was staring me down, watching me, and didn't take his eyes off of me. Everyone was concerned and demanded the driver call security. After the doors closed, we had to wait in the same spot until the intersection lights changed. The creepy man tried to get back on the bus, but the driver wouldn't let him on. The guy then comes to the front part of the bus to knock and grab the driver's attention, but everyone yelled not to let him on. The man began punching the doors, kicking it, screaming, spitting, and making threats. He came up to the window beside me, punched in my direction, and said, "I'll get you. I'll freaking get you. I'm going to kill you." Everyone was ordering the driver to drive, but after the guy nearly got in by kicking the doors, the driver finally took off. When we got to the terminal, I immediately ran towards security and told them to call the police. Police came, wrote everything down. A few days later, they had security footage. Later, they called again to say that they had a couple of suspects matching the description and footage and need me to identify the suspect. If he is who they think he is, I was extremely lucky that night. They couldn't give me any information, but from the sounds of it, this man was wanted for something so severe that they felt they couldn't disclose with me. The police never contacted me again, not even for the identification process, and to this day I have no idea who he is, what happened to him, and what he was planning to do to me. I certainly do know that I was his prey that night. To start, I would like to say that I have a condition called sleep paralysis. I don't tell many people about it because many think I'm crazy, while others think I fake it. For those of you who don't know what sleep paralysis is, here's a very quick recap. It usually happens when you're about to fall asleep or just woken up. You can't move at all. Some people can move their eyes, but I've usually found my own sealed in one direction. Then, figures or shapes will appear around the room. Some hang on walls, some will stand or float near your bed. Some melt out of the walls, and the most common sit on your chest, making it hard to breathe. In the moment, you can feel what these figures are doing, the weight of something sitting on you, or the pain of being cut open. But afterwards, there will always be no physical evidence. Now, the point of all of this is to say that if something shows up in my room, I do my best to ignore it, breathe naturally, and wait for it to pass. So, one night, I was falling asleep and felt my limbs lock up. This was relatively normal, so I tried not to panic as a shape began to creep towards my bed. It had particularly white eyes and no mouth, which is one of my least favorite appearances for these shapes to take, so my breathing was a little heavy. My eyes were half open and I was unable to glance around. Then, I heard a rattling noise. I figured it was part of the hallucination, so I disregarded it. After these noises, a click and a squeak sounded. I heard the thump of a heavy body hit the floor. The part that alarmed me the most was that when I saw a silhouette cross in front of the foot of the bed, most apparitions seems to float or glide. I had never seen one that walked before. This figure then walked out of my sight and I heard another squeaky noise. It sounded similar to a door opening, but these things could never affect real-world items, so again, I figured it was a squeal or something. I heard a low thumping away from my room. I should mention at this point that my room is on the ground floor. The dark shapes and visions continued, and after what seemed like forever, the figure crossed back to where it had originally came from. After that, I hadn't seen it for the rest of the paralysis. The next day, my alarm went off, and after a few minutes I got out of bed. I shut my door since it was open, for some reason. When I turned to go grab some clothes from my bureau, I also saw that the window was open. At this point, I was really freaked out. Either my mom had come in and the sleep paralysis had altered my vision, or someone had actually been in our house. I finished changing and walked upstairs to the kitchen, where my mom explained that the night before, we had been robbed. I still haven't told her what I saw, since it would be no help in seeing as how I thought it was a sleep demon. But I now lock my windows every night. And creepy paralysis-looking demon, please, never come back again.